former missing persons. What's your story? Serious. In 1975 I was a 2-year American child living in Iran. This was before the fall of the Shah and America was friendly with Iran. My father was an independent contractor training the Iranian military how to fly helicopters. We lived in a beautiful home in the expat part of Tehran. I was a tow-headed white toddler with blue eyes, which was a rarity in those parts. One afternoon while my father was at work and my brothers were supposedly at school, my mother decided to go to market with her friends. She decided to leave me with a trusted maid, but this was rare. She had developed an excellent relationship with our family and my mother finally trusted her to watch me alone. My mother returned several hours later to an empty home and went into a panic. She called my father, all the other expats, and the embassy to launch a search for me. My 2 older brothers were supposed to be in school, but had skipped to hang out at the market, smoke hash, and eat pistachios with the locals. They noticed our maid and saw that she was carrying a child. They approached her and saw that it was me. She was talking to a man they didn't know. My brothers confronted her. She screamed, put me on the ground, and ran away. This caused a commotion, and she was captured by the market security, similar to the moral police. Come to find out that she was talking to a slaver attempting to sell me into some strange sex trade looking for blonde hair and blue eyes. The police took her, and we never heard anything about her again. I was saved from sex trafficking by my delinquent brothers. This is my story from a family visit to Disney World when I was 5 years old. We were at Magic Kingdom about to watch the parade. I wanted to have a better look during the parade, so I climbed a nearby tree. I enjoyed a great vantage point for the 1 to 2 hour long show. Following the parade, I calmly climbed down the tree and walked towards my parents and said with a smile on my face, "Wow, that was so fun." They were not happy. Unbeknownst to me, my parents had no idea I was up there that whole time. They were apparently freaking out because they could not find me and they thought I had been kidnapped. They had notified security who shut down the entire park. No one was allowed in or out until they found me. That whole time I had no idea every employee and security personnel in the entire park had been looking for me. I was just like, yup, I was in the tree the entire time. My parents once lost me when I was 6 months old. They started to freak out and cry and all of that crap. Turns out they left in the supermarket in around a mile. Took them 30 minutes and driving back home to figure out that oh shit, we left that little bastard back at the mart. True story. In 7th grade I overslept my alarm and my mom thought I went to school. So later in the day around 8ish the school calls my home telling that I was not at school. Since my mom thought I was at school she starts freaking out and apparently there was a whole school-wide report on trying to find my whereabouts. I eventually get out of bed and realize that I'm wicked late, so I run to school and kinda unique my way into class during the bells. The teacher comes in kinda frantic and asks has anyone had any contact with new username_, and then she makes eye contact with me and was like go to the office. Then everything got sorted out after that. My friends still occasionally joke about it, and they made a FB page for me about the subject. I was missing for 3 days out on the open water. I was boating with my father and we were in a small boat. We had all sorts of supplies, knives, life jackets, fishing rods, flares, cooking utensils and materials, all the stuff. Anyways we were both in this one boat. We were at a dock, but we didn't tie the boat to the dock, which was a dumb idea. I was told to hold on to the dock so I don't flow away. I held on, but there were somewhat strong currents, and it was kind of windy. I let go. I didn't mean to. I had to. I didn't know how to swim at this time, but I started to float away. I couldn't jump out because I would most likely drown, and I was out of sight. I panicked and just hoped for the best. If we didn't have the materials in the boat I probably would have died. Anyways I floated away and eventually I was out of sight from the land. It was very scary. I closed my eyes and just hoped to God I would survive. I prayed and am an atheist. I wanted all the luck I could get. I kept hydrated with the bottled water we had on board, and we had some dried nuts and fruits on board too. I had a thermal blanket, so to go to sleep I would lay in the middle of the boat and cover myself with it. It was surprisingly warm. Anyways, I just tried to keep myself warm and make sure I didn't tip the boat for 3 days. They had boats out looking for me within 2 hours of me floating away. Eventually, they sent out helicopters. I was found after 3 days of being lost out on the open water by a helicopter. It was the scariest 3 days of my life. I apologize if this wasn't very long. I'm on mobile and it's hard to type on here. I may add on when I go on a real computer. I think there was a news report on it somewhere. I'll have to look for that. So, I had a pretty normal childhood. White suburban family, private school, complete material excess yada yada. I have always loved unconventional travel, as in going to places for the experience and the people, rather than renting a $1,200 condo and being a tourist. My parents and I constantly took vacations, and we would see hitchhikers, and I always admired them. The complete freedom and the shit you get to see. This feeling grew and grew until one day, after we got home from a Denver trip, I said fuck it, and decided to go on a real adventure. I woke up one morning for school, like any other, only I didn't bring my school backpack. I brought my grandpa's Alice pack he handed down to me, loaded with camping gear and exactly $87. I drove up to the school, told my best friend at the time what my plan was, and drove to a truck stop on the northern outskirts of the city. Went into the bathroom, shaved my head. I had very long hair at the time. Threw away my phone, destroyed the SIM card, cut up my head and flushed it. Skipped ahead 3 weeks. Lots has happened. Far too many small stories to include, and I'm within 25 miles of the Canadian border. I'm not recognizable, and I've been passing off as a 22-year-old destitute, avoiding polite detection. I've made one phone call back to my buddy, who then passed on my good tidings and apologies to my family and friends. I managed to book myself a small private flight through the Canadian border with a farmer, on his way home to his family in exchange for a partner during the flight to negate the boredom. No passport checks, no nothing. He drives me from the airfield to the nearest town. I'm in Alberta at this point, and I thumb up to a shithole city about 100 miles from Alaska. I met up with some Canadian gutter punks, and they take me tagging. I was a graffiti writer at the time, and I hop my only freight train right to the Alaskan border. I get yet another small flight to Juneau, and stayed in Juneau for 2 weeks. I turn 18, I call my parents, and they book me a flight back home. And then my life carried on as if nothing ever happened. Former custodial kidnapping victim here. My parents separated when I around 2 years old, and my mother's lawyer believed that it would look better to the court if she agreed to allow weekend visitation rights. One weekend, she dropped me off on a Friday night and returned on Sunday afternoon to pick me up, and my biological father had taken me away to parts unknown. She learned about a week later that he'd taken me about halfway down the east coast of the US. We are in the northeast. He had me for a couple of weeks before he returned with me, but refused to actually return me to my mother. Mom's lawyer filed paperwork so that my mother had full custody and an order of protection for my mother and me, but through a bunch of legal fuck-ups, Bo dad was never actually served the paperwork, so the police legally couldn't do anything to return me, even though I was about 4 miles from my mother's house, and she was visiting me nightly. After a couple of weeks of being out of my mother's house, Bo dad decided to skip town with me again, this time crossing the country with me. It was about 2 weeks before my mother found out where I was. This was in the late 70s, so there was no digital trail to follow, no caller ID, etc. And even then, they were only able to determine which state, because he would call collect every couple of days and my grandfather asked where the call was coming from. Several months after that, through sheer luck, they got an actual residential address after finding out that a pediatrician in that state had contacted my pediatrician for my medical records. I was still gone for another few months before my mother was able to bring me home. I was gone for about 10 months or so. I don't know if this counts as missing person. Police were looking for me, but it was for less than 3 days. When I was about 14, I started suffering from really terrible hallucinations, partly because of a bad reaction to new medication I was taking, and was suddenly and unexplainably terrified of every single human being near me. I'd suffered from anxiety for years and I think this just amplified it. The only logical explanation my brain came up with was to go to a place where I thought I'd be safe, which was this little rocky ledge overlooking a hill in a nature reserve near my home that I used to go to as a kid. My memory is so foggy because I'm pretty sure I was having a complete nervous breakdown. I was smart enough to take my school backpack with me, which had my water bottle in it by the time they found me. Luckily my parents remembered my special place and checked it. I was severely dehydrated and hungrier than I've ever been. My parents were so embarrassed, they kept me in hospital for a week and said it was flu. I was in the military, serving on tanks. My unit was in the field for what seemed like forever. They let everyone go back into the barracks for a night to get cleaned up, but needed some guys to stay out in the field to watch the tanks. There was an alert the following morning, and I was reported as a wall by my platoon sergeant to battalion. His exact words were, "I'm tired of him fucking everything up and me getting in trouble for it. I'm not covering his ass this time." Imagine his surprise when the unit returned to the tanks to see me, still on guard duty, where I was assigned the night before by my platoon sergeant. He reported me missing because I was exactly where he told me to be. As punishment for being exactly where I was told to be, I was denied my one night back in the barracks. Such is life in the military. My parents lost me in an amusement park when I was 7. They had given me $20 to play a game and wanted me to give them the change when I was done. I still don't know what exactly caused me to become lost, but when I walked back my parents were gone. Now I loved my parents and all, but I was quite thrilled at being alone as I was a strangely independent child. I proceeded to blow all the money and have the greatest hour of my life. Eventually I ran into my parents, who had contacted the park security and were searching for me. Hugs then anger followed. Still the greatest memory of my childhood. It was quite surreal. So, when I went on vacation to Portugal, my family got small villa. There was a 24-hour restaurant that served breakfast, lunch, and dinner, along with snacks throughout the day. This is where it gets interesting. During dinner one night my 8-year-old mind decided it was a good idea to go exploring throughout the area. After about an hour of exploring I got sort of lost, but I knew the general area where I was. Another hour passed, and that is when my parents probably realized that something was off and decided to tell one of the waiters. Within 10 minutes the entire resort staff was looking for me. By now I'm getting bored, so I decide to start heading back, but that's when the police arrived. I was for some reason terrified of the police, even though I grew up in a safe neighborhood without much crime. So back to the police showing up, I make a break for it to the one place I thought was safe, the villa we stayed in. I hid in the closet and didn't move for what had to have been another hour. By now it is around midnight and my parents returned to the room. My mom was sobbing and my dad was trying to comfort her. I hop out of the closet and that was my 5 or 6 hours I spent missing in Portugal. TL. Doctor, my stupidity caused me to be missing for an evening while in Portugal on vacation. When I was 3 my parents lost me in Blizzard Beach at Disney World. A fat couple picked me up and dropped me at the Lost and found where I sat for several hours. I literally sat on a table with people's lost shit waiting for my parents to claim me. The only reason my parents were able to claim me as their own was thankfully I knew my basic info like address, phone number, parents' names etc. If they were unable to obtain this info from me, confirm they were my real parents, they were going to turn me over to the police when the park closed. Vertical bar.